Welcome to the Midnight Library of Baseball. I'm Ben Orlando, and tonight I welcome another guest to the library. Jason Turbow has written many articles for the New York Times, USA Today, The Atlantic, and others. He's also written many books, including Dynastic, Bombastic, Fantastic, Reggie, Raleigh, Catfish, and Charlie Finley's Swinging A's, as well as They Bled Blue, the 1981 Los Angeles Dodgers. He also wrote, with Michael Duca, The Baseball Codes, The Unwritten Rules of America's Pastime, which I absolutely loved and frequently referenced in my recent episode on the code. I thought it would be fun to talk to Jason and do a deeper dive into the code. So I invited him to the library, and he accepted. Also, during the talk, Jason and I are both recovering from colds, so if you hear a cough or our voices sound a little off, that's probably why. Here's our talk.
Hello, Ben.
Jason, hi.
I'm sorry you're feeling under the weather.
You as well.
Yeah, no, I feel fine. I've had this thing for like 3 weeks now.
Well, thanks for taking the time to speak with me.
Of course.
Yeah, mostly I just was interested in a follow up after reading your book and doing this podcast and just things that, there's so much in there. And then I had some questions and thoughts afterwards. Like normally for a story I think of, I find books and I find lots of different articles. And for this, there's stuff here and there, but to the depth that was in your book or even the topics discussed, there's not a lot. And I mean, do you feel like this has been suppressed, kept out of the media, the code and the different aspects of the
I,
code?
I don't think it's been suppressed. I
Mhm.
think people are actually really interested in talking about it. I mean, we hear the phrase inside baseball used for all manner of insider information across all walks of life. This is legitimately, actually, literally inside baseball.
Right.
And there's only so much space for it because there's a lot to unpack. I think it's difficult to start talking about one part of the code without really delving into it
Mhm.
with a fair degree of detail, which might be why mainstream day to day baseball writers gloss over some of it. But when there's a so called beanball war, that's right there on the front of every sports page.
Mhm.
And everybody who's recounting that game. It is talked about. It's just not necessarily framed in the way that you and I are framing it in this conversation.
Mhm. In terms of where this comes from, I know again you talked about this in the book, but like the why it was necessary, what you see from your research and talking to all these people, what would have happened in the early days if the code hadn't existed?
Well, I think the code exists because it needed to exist. It was never a construct of Major League Baseball as an organization. It emerged from the ranks of the players, and it has only ever lived amid the ranks of the players. Um, and one of the beautiful aspects to me about these unwritten rules of the sport is that they are now and have always been about respect.
Mhm.
The shape of that respect has taken different forms, but that's always been the heart of them. So back in the early days, um, if a player or a team felt disrespected in a given way, there were methods for them to respond on the field because
Mhm.
that was the only way for them to respond, short of showing up at the clubhouse door after the game with a bat in hand. Similarly, if a player was drilled by a baseball, there were on-field ways to respond to that, and it's all grown out of that. It's the way players police themselves and each other, and I think one important aspect is that it gives players and teams a release valve. So if something happens that riles them, there is a way for them to deal with it and then move beyond it, which is exactly how it's always worked throughout the history of the game. I drill you, you drill me, it's over. You keep drilling me, then we're going to have an issue, and then we'll move beyond it after we resolve that issue.
Mhm. Well, Considering, like you're saying, that the players police themselves, what is the consequence of the changing rules and umpires now stepping in and really forbidding pitchers to carry out that retribution?
Yeah, I mean, we're having this conversation during an interesting time in the evolution of the code. I mean, I wrote this book; it was published in 2010, and it pretty accurately described the state of the unwritten rules from pretty much the beginning until that point when the book came out. In the decade plus since, there's been an immense evolution in the way things are handled on the field. Partly, as you suggest, from the umpires on down, and partly amid the players themselves. Um, I look at a couple turning points for me. One was Jose Bautista's bat flip in 2017. I don't know if you remember this, punctuating, the biggest Blue Jays win of the postseason to that point. He flipped his bat high and far. And at that point, I'd been documenting the unwritten rules for a decade by that point nearly. Coming down, against unnecessary, ostentatious displays on the field. Um, Not strongly, but taking note of them. That bat flip was a thing of wonder, right? That was pure joy on a field. There could have been nothing better in that moment than that guy flipping that bat the way he did, and I think everyone saw it and everyone understood it.
Hmm.
Um, that to me was the beginning of the sea change, and I think the crest of that wave came in 2017 during the World Baseball Classic when the team from Puerto Rico played their way to the championship with such unmitigated joy and verve in the United States and in Major League Baseball stadiums, wearing the uniform of their home country, playing the way they play in their home country, the way many Latin American players play in their home countries. Um, it was a wonder to watch. They were the most fun team to watch in that tournament by far, and they lost to the United States in the championship. But the fact that they were playing that style of baseball in the United States in big league stadiums was not lost on the general proletariat. And they showed up a couple weeks later for the regular season, playing in the same stadiums, wearing different uniforms, and everyone dialed it back to the expectations, the
Mm,
way it had always been. Um, and yet the fuse had been lit. And ever since that, to my mind, ever since that World Baseball Classic, these displays of showmanship have been getting bigger and bolder and honestly better. And commensurately, the pitchers who had formerly been really irked by these bat flips and hand claps and little dances in the batter's box began to understand, actually, it's not so disrespectful.
mm,
It's good for the game. And
mm.
so it's all cat and mouse, give and take, right? So if the pitchers aren't responding and the players are doing it, it becomes the new norm.
Right.
And that's what we're seeing these days.
So the difference between I'm just excited and I'm rubbing it in your face, and it's clear now that the emotions are able to come out a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, to the point where in 2018, the next year, I mean, Major League Baseball developed an entire advertising campaign around it. Let the kids play, right? They
Mm,
unveiled it in October, just in time for the playoffs. Like, let's take advantage of this new excitement that the sport honestly needed, pretty desperately at the time. And there were and still occasionally are hiccups. Letting the kids play might make a given red-assed pitcher angry, and he might respond in the way that red-assed pitchers have always responded, and then you got to deal with that. But by and large, it's all these things have been smoothed over, and so this intricate tapestry of give and take in the unwritten rules that has existed on the field forever is now it's all kind of just one smooth surface where people are more free to display their emotions than ever.
and what you said there, let the kids play. I mean, talking about that campaign, does that also then bleed over to this constant debate of, running up the score and you should be able to play as hard as you can until the last inning?
That's actually a separate issue, because there is ongoing perceptions about respect therein. And that, to me, this is one of the most interesting aspects of the code. Nobody disagrees that you shouldn't run up the score. Everyone says, don't run up the
Mm,
score. Big lead late in the game, shut it down. And what that means is you don't stop trying to hit. You just stop trying to play aggressively.
mhm,
Runners advance one base on a single, two bases on a double. Ron Washington, the legendary third base coach, put it to me in very clear terms back when he was the third base first coach for the A's. He said, if there's going to be no play at the plate, I'll send the guy. If it's any threat of, the guy having to slide, I'll hold him. That's
mm,
that's my litmus, and then that summed it up pretty well for me. The the catch is the definition of big lead and late in the game. That's where the disagreements come in. How big a lead is safe, how late in the game is too late, and all those factors depend on the health of the bullpen you're facing, the quality of the team you're facing, the quality of your own team, the health of your own team. This is constantly being weighed when managers and players make these decisions, and it leads to some really interesting conversations. Um, what happens when somebody does play too aggressively? That is taken as a sign of disrespect. You're rubbing our noses in the fact that you're kicking our asses.
mhm.
And I think baseball is unique in the aspect that they play 162 games. And it's not a matter of if, but when. I'm kicking your ass today. You're kicking my ass tomorrow. I don't want to be on the wrong side of that. So I'm going to treat you with the commensurate respect.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I found it interesting. Who was it? Phil Gardner, I think it was.
Bill Garner, sure. One of my favorites.
Um, and I'm not sure if it was Gardner or some other manager who, um, I think it was a different manager who has the strategy or tactic to wear out the other team's bullpen, even if you have a big lead, because it's not just the game, it's the series. It's a 3-game series. And so we're playing the long game here, but that could be a sign of
Absolutely.
disrespect.
Absolutely. So that blew my mind when that happened. It was not Garner. Garner has been out of baseball for quite a while. He had a long and successful managerial career. And you're correct. His mantra was, I'm going to play until I'm comfortable, and it's your job to stop me. And it's not your job to decide when I'm comfortable. But what you're referring to happened a couple years ago, April 2022. Giants manager Gabe Kapler came out, and for the first time that I've ever been aware of, said, "We're going to keep knocking at the bullpen, even with a big lead, even late." It was in an early series game against the Padres, interdivision rival. And he said, "We're not playing to win this game. We're playing to win this series. And this is the first game of the series. And if we can tire out your bullpen today, that gives us an advantage tomorrow. And it gives us an advantage the next day. And we're in your division. So it means when you go on to play your next team after us, you're at a disadvantage then."
Yeah.
And there's no flaw in that argument. Like, that was a perfect argument. It's not about respect. It's about strict strategy. And I gave him a lot of credit for talking about it that way.
So since you've written the book, have any other issues come to light that have been interesting to you about the code and what's happening with baseball right now?
Those are the big ones.
Okay.
Letting the kids play, celebrations becoming normalized on the field, and then Kapler coming down and saying, I'm legislating piling on the runs, have been monumental for me. At the same time, you mentioned this earlier, umpires have been tightening their grip on retaliation. For years, for decades, for generations, there was kind of an unspoken rule that one team drills another team, the umpire is going to give the leeway for the aggrieved team to respond.
Hmm.
Before any real hammer comes down. That's been less the case, although it is still the case. I mean, one interesting aspect of the unwritten rules to look at over the years is the umpire's understanding of the situation. Right? It's not just showing up to umpire a baseball game; it's knowing, oh yeah, 3 weeks ago this thing happened, and they haven't played each other since, so it might be coming to the fore today
Hmm.
because this is the time to respond. And having the perspective to say that team does need to respond in order for both teams to move beyond it.
Yeah.
And if I toss this pitcher before the response has happened, then we're just delaying things because it is going to happen, and tomorrow or the next series or sometimes the next year. Um, so the umpires having a clear handle on how to diffuse things the most effective way possible is kind of a vital part of their job.
What is the, because I know, you opened your book with the Nolan Ryan Robin Ventura incident, which went back at least 3 years. What is the longest back and forth that you can recall between
Ah,
teams?
one of my favorite stories in this regard has to do with Bob Gibson, one of the most notorious owners of the inside corner of the plate in big league history, and longtime big leaguer Pete Lecoq. Lecoq hit a grand slam off of Bob Gibson, and an indignity that for many years was actually worthy of retaliatory pitches. Like, this is something I don't agree with, but it happened for generations. If you own me, I'm going to drill you. Like, I need to get into your head somehow. And pitching inside, moving a batter's feet, that is actually very legitimate. Get his mind off the act of hitting. Gibson was known to do that quite a bit. Lecoq hit a grand slam. Gibson was pulled from the game and never pitched again. This was the very end of his career. Years and years later, in an old timers game, Pete Lecoq is batting. Bob Gibson is on the bench. He gets up, inserts himself into the game. He goes to the mound, says, "Get out of here, I'm pitching," and drills Lecoq just to close the book on that matter.
You can't argue on that one that it's connected to baseball anymore in terms of strategy, right? That's pure. I mean, you can go back to respect, but pure ego and
Yep,
yeah.
it's just, yeah, pure id. But I mean, also let's remember that's what made guys like Gibson and Don Drysdale,
Hmm.
and pitchers of lesser skill who were equally adamant at owning the inside part of the plate. That's what part of what made them effective was the
Hmm.
fear factor and the fact that you knew you had to be on your toes if you were going to hit against these guys, and especially if you're going to hit effectively against these guys.
And there's that story that you have of the player that Nolan Ryan hit, whose career was possibly ended uh, a few
That's
years
right.
in, right? And um, how many players, because clearly players get injured, but how many players like had serious injuries from this type of retribution?
Not many. I mean, far more prevalent than drilling a guy was pitching him inside and
Hmm.
and moving him off the plate, especially guys who crowded the plate. Nolan Ryan learned what he described as his bow tie pitch from Satchel Paige, early on in his career, which is throw a pitch right where they wear their bow tie, scare the bejesus out of them, and you'll move their feet, you'll back them off their plate, and you'll get them thinking about something other than the thing they actually need to think about. And he used that to great effect.
I mean, that's an interesting development. I talked with somebody else about records that won't be broken, records that will change depending on how the game's changing, and this is seems like a significant one because this is a huge factor in dominance for a pitcher and being able to brush people back and hit players. And now that the umpires are stepping in, will certain pitching records not be broken because that's taken away?
Well, pitching records won't be broken, especially the counting numbers, career win totals and the like, because pitchers don't pitch past the sixth inning anymore, and
Hmm.
usually the fifth. I mean, that's a far more um, relevant detail. But yeah, I mean, even when I was reporting this book initially in 2010, the old timers were complaining that pitchers don't utilize the inside part of the plate anymore. They're scared to hit batters. Um, and in retrospect, they were doing just fine at that tactic back then. The modern game, they really have largely forsaken pitching inside to that degree. Hitting guys is kind of anathema to the modern sport, and umpires responding to inside pitches aggressively is part of it, and they do so because of direct instruction from the front office from Major League Baseball.
you talked a lot about money, and obviously money has a big impact of how the code changes and how players interact with each other and what's important to them. And do you think it could get to a point, or is it happening that money there's so much money that it's not even relevant anymore to players, and it kind of, I don't know, goes back to a love for the game?
Yeah, I think it's actually the opposite. I mean, we look just a few days ago, Anthony Rendon of the Angels is being interviewed, the day he arrived at spring training or pretty close to it. And somehow the question came up about his passion for the game. I mean, this guy is making tens or hundreds of millions of dollars. And he was a very, very good player. And he's been injured and kind of seemingly apathetic for the last few years about his recovery. And he said, number one and two for me are God and family. Baseball's a distant third. And the reporter said, "Do you care? Like, do you care about baseball?" Because that's really how it came off. Like that
Yeah.
it seemed like a legitimate question. He's like, "I'm here. Do I want to be here talking to you at 7 in the morning?" So, he cares enough to cash his check and show up at the facility. But, that amount of money is going to attract players who are there for the money as opposed to the sport.
Mhm.
Not to say that that's many players or the majority of players, but certainly more than were there when the money wasn't there. Um, I think where the money does affect things is that these guys are all members of a very exclusive club now. Many of them share agents. Many of them vacation in the same spots in the off season. They share the unique experience of baseball celebrity and can connect over that. So whereas for the duration of baseball history up until probably the 1990s, even um, my team was my team and your team was your team, and there are clear boundaries between those entities, and never shall the two meet. These days, players are fraternizing on the field before games, they're hanging out, they're laughing with each other. That never happened. I
Mhm.
mean, never. Like you would hear from it from your teammates if you were chatting up a visiting player. Like he could be your best friend from childhood, but according to baseball, like you don't talk to that guy till you guys are clear of the ballpark, and like never go into an opposing clubhouse. None of that. Like all those rules have kind of been washed away.
Yeah. Yeah, so there's a the major change to the code right there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's part of it. Like all the things that fired guys up because holy shit, you're the opposition. You can't do that to me. Is now, oh yeah, you're just a guy I know. So like, what harm is it really going to do?
In I'm gonna do an upcoming episode on performance enhancing drugs and what that means. In terms of the code, I know you have sections and talk about cheating. Like what's the overlap there or the connection?
It never appeared to me that Major League Baseball viewed performance enhancing drugs as cheating,
Hmm.
not in the same way they viewed pine tar or cork bats. Um, they looked the other way. Like it was all but tacitly approved by the Major League Baseball commissioner and his staff. I mean, I remember it was a big deal when Mark McGuire kept a bottle of Andro in full view of the press in his locker. That's how free and easy it was. And someone's like, hey, isn't that steroids? And what are we doing? But that was also the era that McGuire and Sosa were reigniting passion in America's pastime with their home run chase. Um, Baseball loved it, and Barry Bonds came along and was shattering all the records. No one was really testing; they didn't care, and they all but encouraged it. I mean, up until the last few years when they've been much more rigorous about their testing, and because it was institutionally approved, it just wasn't viewed as cheating. Everyone did it. So you might look at an opponent who's using pine tar askew, but again, pitchers on every staff use pine tar. Especially now they're checking pitchers, quote unquote checking pitchers, um, repeatedly throughout a game. But for many years, like you would let a guy get away with using sticky stuff because you had your own pitchers using sticky stuff, and if you open that can of worms, it was going to come back to bite you too. Um, it's always been a tricky and interesting subject, but I don't think performance enhancing drugs fall under that rubric.
Well, when you're talking about inside baseball, it's like, what is the dynamic in the clubhouse on the field when, certain players are clearly doing it, a lot of players are, and then some are not or choosing not to, which clearly leaves them at a disadvantage? Like, is there the same hostility as some pitchers maybe don't want to use substances on their fingers and they have a little bit of annoyance towards other pitchers on the team who do, but they don't like do anything?
I think we need to distinguish between PEDs and sticky stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I think during the heart of the steroid era in the 90s, there were guys who were clean who refused to use it, and a lot of them were not making major league rosters. The issue to me was not the superstars; it was the marginal players and the guys fighting for the last 10 spots on a roster. The people who did the PEDs obviously had the advantage, and they were the ones who were really viewed with some animosity by the guys who were clean. That said, the guys who were clean didn't really have a voice or a place to express it because a clubhouse is an insular place. And if you come down on the wrong side of your superstar teammate who is juicing, it's not going to end well for you, which is why you didn't hear a lot of open dissent. I did hear quite a bit of private dissent when I was talking to players during that era, but it never went anywhere for obvious reasons. When it comes to the sticky stuff, most pitchers use it. Almost all pitchers use it. I mean, there's a rosin bag on every mound. It's full of sticky stuff, right? There's a reason that baseball wants pitchers to be able to get a grip on the baseball. It's much easier to aim and much less likely that you will inadvertently hit somebody. It's when the sticky stuff became too sticky and the spin rate jumped out of control and they started playing wiffle ball with Major League Baseballs, and the hitters were just baffled that baseball had to step in because it was affecting the product in the field. And yeah, okay, we'll have a series of 1-0 games with 14 strikeouts on each side. And as someone who loves a good pitching performance, I did like to watch that occasionally. But seeing hitters flail was not much fun for anybody.
Your points about what happens and the bottom of the roster was really like, I hadn't thought about it like that. So last question. So I've done some podcasts and stories on Field of Dreams and The Natural. Just curious for you. Preference, one or the other? You familiar
Um,
with the
I'm
movies or the
I'm
film,
familiar with the
the
movies.
books?
If asked to pick between the two, I'll pick The Natural. I think Field of Dreams has way too many holes in it for me. It seems to be an issue of unresolved an issue. It seems to be a story of unresolved daddy issues
Uh-huh.
that is never adequately addressed because it's leaning way too heavily on the crutch of baseball and nostalgia. I think that script could have been handled in many better ways. But if you're asking me about baseball movies, Bull Durham is far and away my favorite. It rings so true because it was written by a former minor leaguer.
Mm.
That it speaks to the baseball experience in ways that most baseball movies do not.
Okay. Well, Jason, thank you for talking to me today, and I'll let you know
Thank
when
you.
this is up and running. And
Appreciate that.
all right, Jason.
Good.
Well, thanks again.
All
Okay.
right. Take care, Ben.
Okay, you too. Bye. If you like the show, please leave a review at iTunes or wherever you listen. And I've really been appreciating the comments coming in. And again, you can leave comments through the website or by sending me an email at midnightlibraryofbaseball@gmail.com. You can find the podcast at my website, midnightlibraryofbaseball.com. And you can subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, Podbean, Google Podcasts, and a variety of other platforms. You can also find me on Instagram, Midnight Library of Baseball, and on Facebook. The music is A Long Way by Sergei Pavkin at Pixabay. Good night.